I thought I was at my friend's door, until his mom answered, and her smirk made me question everything I thought I knew about boundaries. I had walked down the familiar street countless times before, each step measured, almost absent-minded, but today something felt different, an odd flutter of nervous energy settled in my chest. I was heading to my friend's house, a small gift in hand, entirely convinced I knew the rhythm of this street, the door numbers memorized from years of casual visits. Yet, when I reached the door I thought was his, I hesitated, a fleeting sense of wrongness brushing the edges of my mind. Shrugging it off, I knocked. The door opened almost immediately, and there she was. My friend's mom. Not the frazzled, overworked image I had of her from school stories, but a vision of composed elegance. She was standing there, shoulders relaxed yet confident, a faint smirk playing on her lips that somehow both startled and disarmed me. She had this quiet authority, the kind that doesn't need to demand attention, and for a moment, I simply froze, caught between apology and awe. "You knocked at the wrong door, or maybe the right one," she said, her voice low, smooth, and teasing, carrying a warmth that made me feel immediately exposed, yet oddly safe. I managed a nervous laugh, fumbling with the small gift in my hands, suddenly aware of how inadequate it felt compared to the unexpected presence before me. She stepped aside, a graceful motion, and gestured for me to come in. As I crossed the threshold, I noticed the faint scent of her perfume, a delicate mix of vanilla and citrus, lingering in the air. It was comforting in an entirely disarming way, a subtle sweetness that seemed to wrap around me, coaxing the tension out of my shoulders. Her eyes, sharp yet kind, watched me with a mixture of curiosity and amusement, as though she could read every thought I was frantically trying to hide. The living room was warm, bathed in the golden afternoon light that filtered through sheer curtains. Her hand brushed against mine when she guided me to a seat, just enough to send a quiet, electric jolt up my arm. I caught myself staring at the way the sunlight highlighted the gentle curve of her cheek, the faint lines that spoke of years lived fully, of laughter and late nights. As I sat down, I realized that something had shifted. This was no longer a simple, accidental visit. There was a subtle charge in the air, an unspoken acknowledgement of curiosity, of connection. That smirk lingered in my mind, teasing me with possibilities I wasn't ready to name. And in that moment, I knew that knocking on the wrong door had been the first step into something entirely unexpected, a small beginning to a slow-burning story I didn't yet understand, but already couldn't stop thinking about. We settled into the living room, the afternoon sun casting long, lazy shadows across the polished wooden floor. The faint hum of a distant lawnmower outside mingled with the scent of her perfume, still lingering in the air, making the room feel oddly intimate despite the casual setting. I tried to start a conversation, fumbling over words as I commented on the gift I had brought for her son. She laughed softly, a melodic, easy sound that made my chest tighten without warning. Her laughter wasn't loud or forced, it carried a warmth that felt like an invitation. She leaned back in her chair, arms resting lightly on the armrests, yet there was an ease in her posture that contrasted sharply with my nervous energy. I noticed the subtle tilt of her head, the way her eyes caught the sunlight, and felt an almost magnetic pull toward her presence. Every movement she made seemed deliberate yet effortless, like watching someone perform a quiet dance without realizing anyone was watching. We spoke about trivial things at first, the weather, a recent neighborhood event, even a minor mishap with a grocery delivery. Yet, beneath the polite chatter, there was an undeniable current of curiosity and tension, unspoken yet palpable. When she laughed at one of my awkward jokes, her hand brushed against mine as she gestured, and the brief contact left a lingering warmth that seemed to radiate through my entire arm. I caught myself staring longer than appropriate at the subtle lines of her smile, the graceful way she shifted in her seat. There was a softness in her gaze that made me want to confide more than I should, a quiet invitation to share not just words, but fragments of myself. I found myself speaking more freely than usual, my tone a little looser, my gestures slightly less guarded. And she listened, not just hearing, but truly listening. Her eyes softened when I stumbled over a story, and she offered small, gentle nods that made me feel seen in a way I hadn't expected. I became acutely aware of the warmth in the room, not just the sunlight, but the subtle, steady presence of her body, the way she occupied space with grace. Every brush of her fingers, every fleeting glance, felt loaded with meaning, and I struggled to keep my racing thoughts in check. The playful teasing in her voice hinted at something more, something that made my chest tighten with a mix of anticipation and hesitation. By the time our conversation shifted toward more personal topics, I realized that this was no longer casual small talk. There was an unspoken acknowledgement of connection, a tension hovering just beneath polite manners. Sitting across from her, I felt the strange, intoxicating pull of curiosity and attraction, carefully restrained by the knowledge of what was appropriate, yet impossible to ignore. By the time the conversation shifted toward something more personal, the room seemed to shrink around us, as if the sunlight filtering through the curtains had dimmed just to make space for our dialogue. She poured 2 cups of coffee, the rich aroma filling the air and mingling with the faint trace of her perfume, creating a comforting cocoon that made the ordinary feel charged. As I sipped, I found myself speaking more openly than I had anticipated, sharing little details about my struggles at work, my uncertainty about the future, the tiny failures I usually kept to myself. She listened with an attentiveness that was at once grounding and disarming. Her fingers wrapped around her mug, warm and steady, and every now and then, they brushed lightly against mine as she passed sugar or stirred her coffee, a touch that lingered just a fraction too long to feel casual. Her eyes softened as I spoke, revealing a depth I hadn't noticed before, a quiet vulnerability behind the confident, poised exterior I'd only glimpsed in passing. She didn't offer empty reassurances, but her nods, her subtle smiles, and the way she leaned slightly closer created a safe space, a sense of shared understanding that was both thrilling and unsettling. I noticed the gentle cadence of her breath, the way her lips curved when she smiled, the faint sparkle in her eyes that suggested she understood more than I had expected. We traded stories of past regrets and small triumphs, each anecdote peeling back layers of guardedness. She spoke of nights spent worrying over her children, the little victories of her career, and the quiet loneliness that sometimes accompanied her independence. I found myself leaning in, drawn not just to her words but to the rhythm of her presence, the soft sway of her shoulder as she adjusted in her chair, the casual elegance of her hand gestures, the subtle warmth that seemed to radiate from her very being. In these moments, there was no rush, no awkward interruptions, only the slow unfolding of a connection that was almost imperceptibly intimate. I became hyper-aware of our proximity, the way her shoulder nearly brushed mine, the faint pressure of her gaze holding mine just a beat longer than necessary. The tension between us was no longer playful or fleeting, it was a quiet, simmering force, restrained by mutual awareness yet impossible to ignore. By the time our conversation lulled into a comfortable silence, I felt the strange, intoxicating pull of familiarity and desire. Sitting across from her, I realized that what had begun as a casual, accidental visit was evolving into something far more intricate, a delicate dance of unspoken feelings, quiet vulnerability, and a connection neither of us had expected but both were drawn to. After the quiet intensity of shared stories, a lightness settled over the room. She leaned back in her chair, crossing one leg over the other, a small, mischievous smile playing at the corners of her lips. "So, you really thought you could carry that tray without spilling?" she teased gently, her voice warm but teasing, a note of amusement threading through the words. I laughed nervously, realizing I had indeed fumbled slightly, and she shook her head in mock disapproval, though her eyes twinkled with delight. Her teasing was effortless, playful, yet it carried an undercurrent I couldn't ignore. Every time she smiled, I felt a strange tug at my chest, as if her expression reached directly into me. She leaned slightly forward when emphasizing a point, and her hand brushed mine briefly as she adjusted a cushion. The contact was fleeting, casual in appearance, yet it sent a quiet jolt of awareness through me. My heart skipped, and I caught myself staring at her longer than socially appropriate, noting the subtle elegance in her movements, the curve of her shoulder, the graceful tilt of her head, the way sunlight caught the soft highlights in her hair. As we continued talking, our conversation took on a rhythm of teasing banter, a delicate back and forth where words carried double meanings and glances lingered just long enough to create a quiet tension. I found myself laughing more freely, my earlier nervousness dissolving in the warmth of her presence. She leaned closer to reach for a book on the coffee table, and for a heartbeat, our shoulders brushed. That tiny touch held more weight than either of us acknowledged, leaving a silent, shared acknowledgement of the unusual closeness between us. Her eyes never left mine during these moments, sparkling with amusement yet carrying a subtle, unspoken curiosity. I noticed the slight quirk of her smile, the soft exhale as she laughed at one of my clumsy attempts at humor. Every gesture, every glance, felt loaded with meaning, simple, human, yet undeniably intimate. The energy between us was delicate, a slow-burning charge neither of us could, or wanted to, ignore. In that hour, what began as a casual visit had shifted into a private world of small intimacies and unspoken desires. Each playful tease, each lingering glance, was a step deeper into something we both felt but hadn't yet named. Sitting across from her, I realized that the room was no longer just a living space, it had become a stage for a subtle dance of attraction, tension, and warmth, one where every small interaction carried the possibility of something more. And in that gentle smirk, that fleeting brush of fingers, I knew we were both aware of it. The playful tension lingered in the air long after our laughter had settled, replaced by a quiet intimacy that felt almost fragile. I found myself glancing at her more often, noticing details I had overlooked before, the subtle curve of her fingers, the gentle way she tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear, the soft warmth that radiated from her as she leaned back in her chair. The room felt smaller, warmer, as if the world outside had been muted, leaving only the two of us suspended in this private moment. I hesitated, my words catching in my throat. Then, slowly, I began to speak, not about trivialities, not about polite conversation, but about the parts of myself I usually kept hidden. I spoke of my uncertainty at work, of nights when doubt crept in like a shadow, of the restless ache of feeling like I wasn't quite measuring up. As I spoke, I realized that she wasn't just listening, she was absorbing, understanding, her gaze fixed on me with an intensity that felt like both a lifeline and a gentle challenge. When I faltered, she reached out, placing her hand lightly over mine on the armrest. The contact was deliberate yet tender, warm and grounding. I felt the quiet steadiness of her presence, the reassuring pressure of her fingers, and I was struck by how such a simple gesture could carry so much meaning. Her eyes softened, showing empathy, a silent encouragement that invited me to keep going, to let the walls I usually kept so carefully constructed crumble just a little. She shared fragments of her own life in return, not grand confessions but small truths, the weight of responsibilities, the quiet loneliness she sometimes felt despite the busy hum of her daily life, the private moments of vulnerability she rarely let anyone witness. Each revelation drew us closer, our voices lower, our gestures more careful yet more intimate. The space between us seemed to shrink, not physically, but emotionally, until the faint brush of her hand on mine or the tilt of her head felt charged with unspoken understanding. I became acutely aware of every nuance, the rise and fall of her chest as she breathed, the gentle warmth radiating from her body, the faint scent of her perfume blending with the rich aroma of coffee. There was a magnetic pull, quiet but undeniable, a slow-burning intensity that neither of us needed to name aloud. In that moment, I understood that this connection, this fragile intimacy, was more profound than attraction alone, it was trust, empathy, and a sense of being truly seen. By the time we fell into a comfortable silence, I felt a strange mixture of exhilaration and calm. The world outside the room could wait. For now, it was just us, two people navigating the delicate balance of closeness, curiosity, and unspoken desire, suspended in a moment that neither of us wanted to end. The afternoon had stretched into evening, the golden light of the sun softening into a gentle, amber glow that filled the room with warmth. The air felt heavier somehow, thick with unspoken words and a quiet awareness that lingered between us. We had been talking, laughing, and sharing stories for hours, yet something had shifted subtly, almost imperceptibly, in the spaces between our sentences. I could feel it, a tension that wasn't awkward, but alive, delicate, and magnetic. She reached for a photo on the shelf, a simple gesture that should have been ordinary, yet our hands brushed just slightly as she handed it to me. The contact was fleeting, barely a touch, but it left an electric pulse that ran up my arm and settled deep in my chest. I felt my heart stutter, a strange combination of thrill and hesitation coursing through me. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Instead, we lingered in that silent, loaded space, aware of the near touch and the tension it carried. Her eyes met mine, steady and searching, as if she were silently asking a question neither of us was ready to voice. I noticed the subtle warmth radiating from her body, the gentle sway of her shoulder as she adjusted her position, the way her fingers lingered near mine for just an instant longer than necessary. Every small movement, every glance, carried meaning, a slow and deliberate choreography that neither of us needed to explain. I shifted slightly closer under the guise of adjusting my chair, feeling the soft brush of her sweater against my arm. Her presence was magnetic, quiet, elegant, yet charged with energy that drew me in without words. The room felt suspended in time, the outside world faded, leaving only the quiet rhythm of our breaths, the faint scent of her perfume, and the subtle warmth that filled the space between us. It was a moment that could have escalated or retreated, a fragile balance of curiosity, desire, and restraint. The nearness of her body, the brush of her fingers, the soft intensity of her gaze, it all pressed gently against the boundaries we had silently set. And yet, neither of us moved away. Instead, we lingered, suspended in a shared acknowledgement of a connection too strong to ignore but too delicate to act upon openly. By the time she finally spoke, her voice was low and tinged with a smile, drawing me back from the brink of unspoken possibility. "Careful there," she said softly, the playful warmth in her tone a reminder of the line we both knew we shouldn't cross, at least not yet. And in that gentle caution, there was also permission to feel, to notice, and to dwell in this slow, simmering closeness. The evening had fully settled in, casting soft shadows across the living room where we had spent hours in conversation, laughter, and quiet moments of shared vulnerability. The sun was gone, replaced by the gentle glow of a lamp that bathed the space in warm, golden light. There was a calmness now, a delicate stillness that contrasted sharply with the electric tension of earlier hours. I stood up, nervously straightening my shirt, the small gift still tucked under my arm. The visit had stretched far longer than I had expected, yet the thought of leaving now carried a strange, reluctant weight. She rose as well, moving toward the door with that familiar elegance, the soft sway of her body and the grace in her movements imprinting themselves in my mind. Before I could speak, she paused, turning to face me fully. Her eyes met mine, steady and kind, carrying a quiet acknowledgement of everything that had transpired between us. She reached out, placing her hand lightly on my arm. The contact was brief, just a touch, but the warmth of it lingered, seeping into my chest and leaving a memory I knew I would carry long after this moment. The faint scent of her perfume, vanilla and citrus, drifted subtly, anchoring the memory of her presence. "I'm glad you stopped by," she said softly, her voice calm but carrying an unmistakable undertone of shared understanding. There was no need for more words. In the tilt of her head, in the gentle curve of her smile, in the way her fingers lingered just slightly longer than necessary, everything was said. I could feel the unspoken connection between us, the slow-burning familiarity and attraction that had threaded through every moment of our encounter, now acknowledged without crossing the invisible line we had both respected. I smiled, hesitant but genuine, and thanked her, my voice quieter than usual, carrying a weight of unspoken feeling. As I turned toward the door, I glanced back once more. She stood framed in the doorway, the soft light catching the gentle highlights of her hair, her smile calm, knowing, and warm. It was a smile that said more than words ever could, an acknowledgement of closeness, an unspoken promise, and a subtle encouragement to carry this connection forward, even if only in memory for now. The door closed behind me, yet the warmth of her presence lingered, echoing in my chest. The world outside felt the same, but I had changed, carrying with me the quiet intimacy of hours spent in shared vulnerability, gentle touches, and knowing glances. What began as an accidental visit had evolved into a subtle, slow-burning connection, emotional, tender, and profoundly human. And though the story had reached its end for now, the memory of her smile, the warmth of her hand, and the electric thrill of proximity would remain, a gentle, enduring reminder of the delicate, unspoken bond we had forged. If you felt the tension, the warmth, and the slow burn connection between them, don't forget to hit like and subscribe for more age gap romance stories. Share your thoughts in the comments. What would you do if you were in his shoes?